Introduce our guest today, who is one of the most respected political analysts in America. For more
Wow.
than, oh yeah, it's true. For more than 4 decades, Charlie Cook has helped journalists, candidates, elected officials, and I might add donors, plus everyday voters, to make sense of the nation's political landscape. He is the founder of the Cook Political Report, the nonpartisan publication whose race ratings have become really the gold standard for analyzing congressional, Senate, gubernatorial, and presidential elections. With that, Charlie, I would love to welcome you to our audience, and so glad to find you on Substack. Why don't you and I chat for a little bit, and then we'll open it up to folks on the call. But if you would tell, just describe the difference, perhaps, between what happens in a midterm election and what happens in a general election, if you would.
That's a great question, and thanks for having me on. Um, Midterm elections, there's kind of a recipe, and what typically happens is that people that either belong to or lean towards a president's party, maybe they're satisfied. Sometimes they're a little complacent. Sometimes they're a little disappointed. Sometimes they're deeply disillusioned, but rarely are they fired up, energized. And so they just simply don't turn out in midterm elections nearly the way they do in presidential years. Then you look at the opposition party, and in this era of hyperpartisanship, where each side just hates the other, that uh, people in the opposition party are generally they're madder than hell that they lost 2 years earlier, and they can't wait to vote to basically reverse what happened in the last election. So they tend to be hyper energized, and so they drop off less from the presidential numbers than the party in the White House. And then you have this little slice of independents. Now, it depends on your definition. If you just say all adults, then roughly 45% say they're independents. If you look at registered voters, it's about a third. But the thing is, three-quarters of independents aren't very independent. They claim to be, I'm an independent, but if you push them, they either lean Democrat and vote that way 85, 90% of the time, or they lean Republican and vote that way 95% of the time. And so really only 10% of all registered voters are like really independents, and then they vote. They tend to be fickle. They tend to get buyer's remorse. They tend to uh, uh, turn against a president on a moment's notice, and stay that way. And so they disproportionately break for the opposition party these days. So those are the three things that usually happens, and why the party in the White House has lost seats and all but two midterm elections since the end of World War II. So it's an asymmetric turnout, and then it's pure independence breaking away from the president's party. Now, so you say, well, okay, does that apply this year? Absolutely. Uh, any polling data you look at, the energy level is differential between Democrats and Republicans is huge this year, with Democrats hyper motivated and Republicans not so much. And independents breaking very solidly against the president, and generally speaking against Republicans as well. So this midterm seems to be shaping up exactly like the historic norm. So I don't think people should act surprised with what's happening, but I do think that Democrats, to a partisan, everything's about turnout. That's not, I mean, a lot of the elections the Democrats lose is not because of turnout. It's because, maybe they're losing independents. They're not doing well among independents. But, and I'm sitting in Maine. We moved here 5 years ago. Um, when Susan Collins got reelected 6 years ago, she got reelected by 9 points. despite the fact that she was outspent by a big margin, at the same night, same electorate, that Joe Biden was winning by 9 points. So obviously that wasn't turnout, and it was about losing independence. And you've got to break into that group that's sort of between the two 48-yard lines.
From your point of view, I'm dying to ask you what do journalists not get right about campaigns, and what do campaign consultants not get right about campaigns?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I think a lot of people they come up with sort of a worldview of how campaigns worked, and it doesn't really change much over time. When the fact is, you know, politics. I first worked in my first campaign as a senior in high school in 1972. Started the newsletter, as you said, in 1984. So I had about a dozen. I feel like I've sort of straddled two eras, and one era was up until 1994, and the other was after 1994. And our politics and the way it changes, the way it operates, is totally different than it was back in, say, the first dozen years of my of doing the newsletter and first half of my overall career in the general area, and that there's very little ticket splitting anymore. That people vote straight parties. They don't jump off much at all. And there's not that much shifting from one election to the next. And it's if someone is upset with their party, they're a lot more likely to just not show up or to skip over that office on a ballot than they are to vote for the other side. And that we typically in federal races see 95, 96%, even higher in midterm elections, people voting for whatever party they belong to or lean towards. So it's the persuadable electorate is just a lot smaller than I think a lot of journalists think. And I'd say the other thing is, I'd say most political reporters wouldn't know a decent poll if it bit them in the ass. They
Mm-hmm.
know nothing about polling, and they treat them like a commodity. Like every poll's the same. Every poll should have the same, is of equal credibility. When, oh, I don't know, we've probably had 30 polls in Maine so far. As far as I'm concerned, only two have been worth a damn. The New York Times and the Fox News poll. They're the only, sort of entities that I consider professional pollsters, real serious professional political pollsters that have gone in. And one, the New York Times poll had, before he dropped out, Graham Plattner ahead by 2. The Fox poll had Collins up by 3, which basically means the race was dead even. But so many reporters, they're looking at these dime store polls that aren't worth anything. And you could find any kind of number you want to back up whatever story thesis you have.
Question about methodology these days. How in the world can a pollster find somebody to interview when I have a cell phone from 15 years ago that I got in Annapolis? So my area code is still 443. I live in Iowa. How does a pollster work around finding people who are actually voters in an election?
Well, I mean, first of all, good pollsters now, they're working off voter files. They're not working off of just random digit dialing. Second, there are plenty of commercial databases that, whenever you're filling something out to join something, subscribe to something, buy something, a warranty, whatever, and a lot of these things have you put your phone number down, which is now basically a cell phone, and so they merge them all together so that campaigns and pollsters can, for overwhelming majority of voters, have their cell phone numbers, and it doesn't matter what the prefix is. That unless you just move there, your voter file. And in a lot of states, the state actually has your phone number. Sort of embedded with your voter file. So they know how to, they know your cell phones and they know how to get you. And um, it's and now, we're doing, there's obviously a lot of multimodal where there's, the normal telephone, and then there's, text to web where they send you a text and say, invite you to uh, go online and take this survey. There are various different methodologies that pollsters are using to adapt to try to get the best possible sample. But the reality is that polling was never as accurate as we pretended it used to be. But actually, with good pollsters, it's a lot better than most people think it is.
Okay. Why does Donald Trump and the administration want our voter files so desperately?
He says, first of all, I think you have to take about 98% of everything he says and just chalk it up to bluster. Or, I think sometimes he's kind of like a fish. If he's not talking, he can't breathe. I mean, it requires, uh, but um, to the extent that they can look at blue states and particularly and poke holes and look at all the people that may or may not be alive, may or may not be citizens. I mean, um, but he's constantly talking about lots of things, and I don't expect that any swing states or Democratic states are likely to hand over voter files. I mean, most Secretary of State's worth a darn. They're not going to hand that over.
A lot of them have, though, haven't they?
I don't know of any swing states that have.
Oh, swing states. Okay. Let's talk about Iowa. Iowa is considered by some, and we hope it's true, a swing state. Do you think that is the case?
No, I think it hadn't been a swing state in a long time.
Well, let me
Are you just talking about in general, or are you talking about
well, let me
specific?
rephrase this. With an open gubernatorial race and an open Senate race, that there is a belief that this could be an upset or there could be a surprise or Iowa is in play. That's the favorite phrase. Do you concur?
Well, first of all, when you sort of think of blue, red, purple, I mean blue, red, and purple, um, particularly federal races, there are 24 red states and 48 senators, and all 48 are Republican. There are 19 blue states, and 37 out of 38 senators from those states are Democrats, with Susan Collins the only exception. So it's in the seven swing states that, where you've got, kind of a decent mix. Federal races, and you look at the House representative, federal races, they basically don't jump the tracks much. Blue districts vote blue, red, states districts vote red, and the swing is in the purple. Now, are there more exceptions to the rule on governors than federal races like U.S. House, U.S. Senate? Absolutely. But not that many. But you have 50 states, and there are two Republicans that are in blue states, one in New Hampshire, one in Vermont. You have two Democrats in red states, Kansas and Kentucky, and that's it. For the 43 states that are either red or blue, that's it. In terms of federal, that is, it's those four. So it'd be 44, it'd be 46, but they don't jump the track much. Now, do I think the Iowa governor's race is in play? Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. If you put a gun at my head, my guess is that Rob Sand's going to win. But it's that just doesn't have much. I'm a good bit more skeptical on federal races because um, I don't see I don't see many. To me, if a Republican is disaffected this year, they're a heck of a lot more likely to not show up or to skip over various offices on the ballot than they are vote for a Democrat. I mean, because I think a lot of these people probably haven't voted for a Democrat for any level in a really, really long time. And so I'm a little skeptical on that. And that's why I think the Senate map has always been harder than a lot of people think. That when you're asking, when you're expecting states to flip colors when most of the voters in that state haven't voted for the opposition party since Moby Dick was a guppy, um, we see this every cycle, and so I'm a little more skeptical. But clearly, something I was acting differently this year, and so could the Iowa Senate race flip? Yeah, it could. Do I think it's 50-50? Hell no. But no, it could. And the governor's race, I think it probably will. And there's some House races that may skip over a little bit. But that we're not seeing as much of that in other states as we are in Iowa. And, we'll have to wait and see whether Iowa, in the Senate flips. But, I'd give it probably a 1 in 4 chance.
Charlie, I'm old enough to remember when Barack Obama won the Iowa caucuses. I couldn't believe it. I'm old enough to remember when Barack Obama won the state of Iowa the first time. And I'm also old enough to remember that he won a second time in Iowa. So what's the difference? He had a ground game. Many might
About
say.
14 years since he got reelected.
Okay.
I mean, no, American politics has shifted. The battle lines have gotten so much harder, and where there are just very, very, very few defections anymore. I mean, if you think, I mean, if there's only one U.S. senator in the entire country that has a seat in an opposite colored state, that's got to tell you something. I mean, when you only have 14 Senate seats that are in purple states, and the rest are split, with the exception of Collins in Maine, 100% each direction, that doesn't happen accidental.
So I could talk to you one-on-one for hours, but we have some very smart people on this call. I don't know that I've explained to you that I'm a part of what's called the Iowa Writers Collaborative, and there are several people who are far more learned about Iowa politics than I am, and I'm going to start calling them.
Or than I am as well either, but
well, we'll give it a shot. I'm going to open with Laura Bellin, who writes the Bleeding Heartland. Laura, is your microphone on? Are you ready to?
I believe I did unmute myself. I completely agree. I really view the Senate race as a long shot, and the governor. I do think the governor's race is a toss-up, but those numbers are really daunting right now in Iowa. And I put it in the chat, but the Democrats had a pretty big voter registration advantage when Barack Obama won the state, and now Republicans have an even bigger voter registration advantage. So the landscape is just completely different. But my questions are different. You were talking about how much has changed in politics in the generations that people don't split tickets. I wanted to ask you about what's the current thinking of a couple of truisms that I learned many years ago. One is that undecideds break for the challenger. My understanding is that this is no longer true, that undecideds at the very late in the game split against the incumbent, because if they were if they liked the incumbent, they wouldn't be undecided. That used to be a thought, but I think with all of the spending, and then I have another question after that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to weave the last thing you said with the question that Julie had earlier about misperceptions. I think journalists have bought into the notion that money is determinative. And, I think it comes from a couple of decades of reprinting Common Cause press releases as news stories. And that there's a law of diminishing returns on the effectiveness of money. And after a while, it just, every additional dollar just means much, 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 much less out there. Number two, all dollars aren't the same. And that, this election, for example, while the parties, Republicans, party committees and super PACs have more money than Democrats, are doing better financially than Democrats are, but Democrats typically are doing much, much better on the candidate fundraising. Now, what's the difference? Candidates buy their television or broadcast by the lowest unit rate, the rate that a station would charge their very best customer. The super PACs or political committees, party committees, they go at whatever the margin or whatever the market will bear. And so sometimes they can pay 3, 4, 5 times as much as a candidate would for the same 30-second ad or 60-second radio ad or whatever. So that all money isn't the same. But I agree. I mean, I think undecideds do tend to break for challengers. But I think, more than anything else, in midterm elections, they just break overwhelmingly, in swing races
Mhm.
against the party in power. And in midterm elections, it could be 97, 96, 97, 98% of all Democrats will vote for a Democrat and all Republicans will vote for a Republican.
Mhm.
And the people that claim to be independent, but 3/4 of them aren't. And as I said earlier, they vote, 85%, 80, 85% for whichever party they profess to lean towards. They just have some deep inner-seated psychological need to call themselves independents, but functionally speaking, they're partisans. But I think undecideds do tend to break, or pure independents tend to break. They tend to vote against whichever party has screwed them most recently, betrayed them most recently, um, or they're most afraid of.
Mhm.
And and the idea of the kind of margins that we're talking about. One of my favorite statistics is that going into the last presidential election, remember the New York Times was doing every day they were publishing the averages in the 7 swing states, Michigan,
Mhm.
Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina. They were of credible polls that met certain standards in each of those 7 states. And what was interesting to me was in 6 of the 7 swing states, the leading candidate was at 49%. The trailing candidate, let me move it over to get it. Trailing candidate was at 48%. In Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, it was Kamala Harris at 49 and Trump at 48. In Nevada, Georgia, and North Carolina, it was Trump at 49 and Harris at 48. And Arizona was the only one that wasn't 49, 48, one way or the other. And that was 50% for Trump and 47% for Harris. And if you look, so each of those polls, all 7 states, average 3% undecided, and basically 2/3 of them broke at the end to Trump. And there you have the outcome in each of those 7.
If the polls were accurate. Julie, can I ask one
Well,
more quick question?
Yes, please. Yep, go ahead.
This is another, I don't even remember where I originally heard this, but the idea being that if you vote for the same party 3 elections in a row, that something really cataclysmic has to happen to make you change your voting behavior, like a divorce, losing your job, a huge
I've
recession, or
never
like
heard that.
January 6th.
I've never heard that before,
You've never heard that. Okay.
and
I was wondering what the
well,
research says about that.
I don't particularly believe it. I
Okay.
mean, that a zebra's got to change their stripes. I mean, that just doesn't, and well, I don't know.
Okay, Laura, I'll come back to you, but I want to get
Okay.
Richard Bender and Barry Pyatt and a couple others on the call too. Richard Bender is with us. He is the man we have to blame or celebrate the creation of the Iowa caucus system. I don't know if you've met Richard before, but Richard, what do you have to say and ask of our guest today?
Well, there was a CNBC did a poll with a series of interesting questions that I hadn't really seen before. Are you more likely to support or oppose a candidate who is one, a Democratic Socialist, and in that case, the negatives first and the more likely to support second, 50 to 32. The Trump endorsed candidate, less likely 52 to 29, and the MAGA supported candidate 59 to 27. These numbers seem really extreme, but I suspect there's some effect going on, and I'd like to get your views on that series of questions and what impact you think it'll really have.
Sure. The CNBC poll is done by the same pair of polling firms that do the NBC News poll. So it's Hart Research on the Democratic side and Public Opinion Strategies on the Republican side. And I think they are as good of polling firms as there are in the business. Having said that, when I saw those, I thought it was a really shitty worded set of questions because it didn't really give you an option for, I don't particularly like either. If you didn't like Democratic Socialists and if you didn't like MAGA, where the hell do you go? And so I just thought it was a really flawed question, despite the fact that I have an enormous amount of respect for both of those polling firms.
Okay, thanks.
But
Richard,
there was a lot of candidates that are neither MAGA nor Democratic Socialists. So in a situation like that, what do you think? Do you see any impact?
Well, I mean, the thing is, I just think that set of those two poll questions just wouldn't tell you a damn thing about that big chunk of people that aren't MAGA and aren't Democratic Socialists. So I don't. The thing is, where do Democratic Socialists usually win? Really deep blue places. Where do MAGA candidates typically win? Really ruby red places. And last time I checked, Mamdani didn't win in a purple city or a red city. It was in a deep blue city. And the race was in a Democratic primary, which I expect to be, when was the last? I mean, AOC, is she in a swing district? No, I don't think so. So that the people that tend to be the most aggressively one way or the other, they can do that because they're not in places where, they could try to lose and still not lose in those kind of constituencies. So go ahead.
Charlie,
in Iowa.
Well, Richard, hold on a second. With Richard on the call, Charlie, and I realize this isn't quite in your wheelhouse, but what do you think the chances of Iowa's caucus, first in the nation caucus, being revived? It is a possibility. Just spitball it.
I am not a fan of the caucus system, but I believe to my core that Iowa is a state that ought to be early because it is precisely the kinds of place that Democrats used to be able to win, relatively often and have not been in a while. And small town, rural America, those are the kinds of places that Democrats are forfeiting. And which is why the Electoral College has gotten so difficult, which is why the United States Senate has gotten so difficult, is that in the non-population driven constituencies, Democrats have a really, really, really hard time winning in those kinds of places. And but I think the execution of the 2020 caucus, it was so horrible that I don't have much hope for the caucus or for a caucus format in Iowa being anywhere near the front.
Lesson learned. The opposition just
Yeah,
might jam your phone lines when they're trying to get your results in.
yeah, no, I mean, I think it's tragic. I really do. And I don't, I mean, personally, I never particularly liked the caucus system because to me, it's a system designed to minimize participation. And I think nominations should contest for nomination should maximize participation. So, my nature tends to be against caucuses, but my nature is also very pro Iowa. So I'm a little conflicted, but it's
Okay. All right. We have so many people who want to talk to you. I hate to cut you short, but Barry Pyatt served in as press secretary on the Hill for many years, and he's now a member of the Iowa Writers Collaborative covering Congress. Barry, do you have a question or a comment?
More of a comment, I think, that I would like to get a reaction to, and that is, I think that history and numbers are, of course, important, but I think it's possible to put way too much stock in them. Because what often gets left out of the equation, I think, of the great predictors is current lived experience and the skills of the candidates. And I think most Americans at this point have figured out that Donald Trump is a full-time pathological liar, grifter, and crook. And they have also figured out that the impact of his policies on their lives. And Iowa is a great example. I think we're leading the nation, or at a near high in terms of farm bankruptcies. We, drink cancer water whenever we turn on the tap. The current experience that that Iowans are having with Republicans is not good, and I think that point is going to get made. And on the skill of the candidates, I've written in my column that this is probably the worst congressional delegation in Iowa's history. And I think they are also the least skilled congressional delegation in Iowa's history. And I think that's all going to be factored into to what happens.
Okay, what do you say, Charlie?
I think you could probably say that about 30 states, and some of them are red states in terms of the worst delegations they've ever had. Because I think it speaks in some ways to the state of Congress and who is running for elective office now, who's running for federal office these days. I can think of a whole lot of states that are in that category. But to your broader point, Democrats, right now Trump has got 37, 38, 39% approval rating nationally, and his disapproval's, mid 50s. And so I don't try to generalize much beyond that in terms of how they see him. But at the same time, there is some history here. And we hear lots about Democrats being so angry. And to me, and our leaders haven't stood up to Trump. Well, first of all, when I noticed the anger building up, it was about 2 or 3 days after the 2024 election, when he hadn't been president for almost 4 years. So there hadn't been anybody to stand up to. To me, they're more angry about losing, and they should be. Because in January of 2021, when Trump packed up and left Washington, Democrats had the White House, they had a majority in the House, they had a majority in the Senate. And I think the question the Democrats should ask is, how did they screw up so badly that they lost it all within 4 years? All of it.
In your heart of hearts, have you contemplated the possibility that there was foreign interference in the United States?
I think that's baloney.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I know. I think absolutely baloney, and and it kind of goes to the thing about, and I know Trump is the world's worst about this. Is there are only 2 outcomes to an election? Either I win or it was stolen. But I think there are a lot of people that have sort of some predilection. I mean, I remember when Ohio in I guess it was what 2004. Ohio Democrats were convinced that Ohio had been stolen from John Kerry, and it's like, come on, get a grip. You lost. I mean, sometimes it was close, but it sort of happens. But to me, the question Democrats ought to ask is, how did they screw things up and get thrown out? And there's this part of a bigger pattern. We now have had 5 consecutive presidents take the oath of office, first take the oath of office with their party having majorities in both the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House. And when they left, their party had Zippo, starting with Bill Clinton, 5 in a row. And to me, and we've had 11 of the last 13 elections. Either the House, the Senate, or the presidency is flipped, 11 out of 13. And every midterm election, at least one of either the House or the Senate has flipped in terms of those during that period of time. That we have a cycle. A party gets in, they go too far, too fast, or too much, and they get thrown out of one or both chambers of Congress 2 years in, and whatever the remaining chamber after 4 or after 8 years, but 5 in a row, and it's a matter of sort of going too far. And I was kind of surprised that I thought we had a chance to break that cycle in 2020 when Biden ran. But to me, and I like the guy personally, I've known him for a long time, like him a great deal. But the agenda was as if Democrats won by a landslide, when the reality is they just sort of barely won. I mean, it was not. I mean, when you take it and look state by state, what were the margins? It was like 130,000 votes in 3 states. That's called just barely winning. And going as aggressively as you do and resurfacing inflation that had been largely dormant for 40 years, that'll get you thrown out of office.
Okay, let's keep going through the roster here. I'd like to call on Pete Rose and then Lyle Muller. If any of the rest of you have a comment or a question for Charlie Cook, not sure where else you'll get an opportunity to do that, so take advantage and raise your hand. But Pete, you had an interesting comment in the chat. You're up next.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I was wondering, Charlie, if since you spoke recently or just a couple months ago at Sheslow Auditorium at Drake University, whether you have had any changes at all concerning the probable outcomes in Iowa. Also, do you believe ranked voting that's being used in Maine and Alaska and other places has made any difference, and how? And what news sources do you regularly read?
Great questions. Thanks, Pete.
Oh, wow. Well, make sure I come back to the last one. I think we had some hints that Iowa was behaving a little outside of the norm then. I think we have more hints now. As I said a little while ago, I think that's much more likely in the governor's race than in the Senate race. But I think sometimes a party can be in the end party in a state for too long and kind of screw the pooch. And you may be seeing something of that now, but we're not seeing nearly as we're seeing it to a greater extent, I think, in Iowa than just about anywhere else. But yeah, no, I think things have shifted some, but probably not as much as a lot of people think, or a lot of people are hoping. But I think it's shifted some. News, and keep in mind you're talking to a 73-year-old guy. Um, the Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal. We watch at least one, if not two, of the broadcast news every morning. And I virtually never watch any cable whatsoever. And my theory is that cable is like sticking a powerful vacuum cleaner in your ear and just sucks your brains out. And I don't give a shit whether it's MS Now or Fox and CNN. They don't even know who they are anymore. And I just think it's worse than nothing. And then the rest that I read is all, very specialized stuff. But I spend a lot of time looking at crosstabs of polling, where I get my hands on the quality stuff. And that's what's so awesome about the New York Times polling, where, and actually Fox and several of the others, where they publish the crosstabs. And it's awesome, where I've gone through, and there are lots of things in there that people, for example, in Maine, where I am, Graham Plattner, he's the working, was running as a working class, candidate going after the working class. Let's see. This is the New York Times poll. How was Plattner doing among non-college whites? Oh, wait. He was losing to Collins by 23 points, 59 to 36. How was Plattner doing with college-educated whites? He was winning by 37 points, 68-31. What? That people, you ought to read. They ought to read the fine print. Look at the crosstabs, but look at the crosstabs of polls that you could be reasonably sure of, and that's why I think we're now going into a phase where more of the polling is done by national outfits that are really pretty good, and I say that as I have always been a fan of Joanne Selzer's, and to me, I don't care who you are. You could be the best pollster that ever lived, and 1 out of 20 of your polls is going to look like it. The interviews were conducted on another planet, and that just doesn't matter how good you are. Yeah. And I think she had one bomber, and but it's a shame what's happened. But the thing is, there's just so much schlock out there that, and Maine is particularly a horrible state with public polling, so that I spend a lot of time, looking at the subgroups and trying to make some sense of it. And I think a lot of times after elections, people don't go back and look at the exit polls to see what really did happen. And why did something happen? They just sort of embrace whatever fits into the way they look at the world. And I think more people talking about politics than studying it.
I'm sorry, Charlie, and ranked choice voting.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you asked that. I have a great deal of guilt because about 35 or so years ago, I had a young man come in from a group called Fair Vote. And he was pushing what was then known as the Australian ballot. Now we call it ranked choice. And I all but threw him out of my office. That to me, it was complicated. It was a solution in search of a problem. It wasn't obvious to me in the very late 80s, maybe 1990, 91, 92, that the system was getting way off track. And I don't think ranked choice is a silver bullet, but I think it is. It's a step in the right direction, and that. And now they're all, the way Iowa does it is, Maine does it is a little bit different from Alaska, and lots of places do it slightly differently. But I think ranked choice is a good thing. I think primaries where independents are allowed to vote in either party's primary. I think that's pretty healthy. But I think our system was designed by the founders, and it worked really well for 200 years. And for the last 50, it's not. But do I trust these bozos to have a constitutional convention? Hell no. So I don't know what in the world we do. But this isn't working, and the worst thing is that we're not getting the caliber. There are a few really high quality people elected, running for office, elected to office now, but it's nothing like it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. And that I think the kinds of people we really want to run are not running in lots of situations, and so we're sort of getting with what's left.
Willing to share some names?
Put it this way, I can count the number of House members that I respect on one hand.
Okay. All right. Well, let's leave it there.
And actually probably have a couple fingers left over. But no, I was about to say something else, but that would be a little catty. But yeah, we're just, and let me just to put this in a partisan. What's interesting to me is that, the swing states. I'm taking Senate races for a second. What's really interesting to me is that Democrats are winning disproportionately the Senate races in the 7 swing states, at least since Donald Trump first took office. And it's, I think it's 17 out of 21 U.S. Senate races from those 7 states Democrats have won. And that most of the party switches that party shifts in elections that we've seen over the last 20 years or so has been either Democrats consolidating blue states or Republicans consolidating red states. And then the rest is the swing states going back and forth. But a couple of weeks before the 2024 election, I was talking with a friend who was a Republican pollster and national pollster, and I asked him, what worries you most? And this guy is talking as a Republican. He says, we Republicans, we are not running the same kind of candidates in swing states that we once were. And that now in swing states, the kinds of people that we used to nominate fairly regularly, they're either not running because they don't think they could win a MAGA-oriented primary, or they are running and are losing a MAGA-oriented primary. And that Democrats in the last few years, in this 2018 forward, Democrats have done a better job of fielding sort of purple candidates in purple states and not deep blue candidates in purple states, while Republicans have been nominating a lot of red candidates in purple states. And that doesn't work. It just simply doesn't. Now, I think a danger for Democrats right now is to the extent that they nominate in some key races some pretty blue candidates in purple places. That's how you blow races that you might otherwise win.
Okay. Well, Pete, thank you. Those are great questions. We have a number of people I want to get through, and we only have about 10 minutes left. So I'd like to zoom towards Lyle Muller, former Cedar Rapids Gazette editor, now a part of the Iowa Writers Collaborative. And he leads a program we have within the Iowa Writers Collaborative called the Emerging Journalist Program. So he works with student journalists around the state and helps them, mentor them, and also get them published within the Iowa Writers Collaborative. So Lyle, that's my introduction to you.
Thank you. I cover a lot of on immigration, and I have another column coming up in which I've interviewed a minister from the Minneapolis, St. Paul area who was involved with some of the demonstrations last winter after the death of Renee Good and Alex Pretty. What I'm wondering is, from the polling aspect, how deeply is immigration affecting what people are thinking? Are you learning some things about immigration's impact, immigration policies impact in your polling?
I I think you have plenty of people that feel very passionately about the immigration issue, some on each side, and most of them are not swing voters. You show me people that are militantly um, against ICE, and I'll show you somebody that probably hadn't voted for a Republican in a while. You show someone who is just absolutely livid about what was happening along the border during the Biden administration, and I'll show you somebody that probably hadn't voted for a Democrat in a long time. That swing voters, I don't think that many swing voters are getting pulled one direction or the other. I mean, I think it's important to look when you look at any polling data is to look and see who are these people and how have they voted and have they if it's somebody that um, voted for let's forget 2016 because it was a split decision, but maybe voted for Biden in 2020 and Trump in 2024. Okay, I'd take, or vice versa. Okay, I'd take a look at that, or that have voted in recent Senate elections for one from each party or something like that. But I don't think it's an issue that I think it's an issue that is really good about mobilizing a base, a party base. And I can think of a whole lot of better issues that would be more likely to turn swing voters that more affect their daily lives.
Okay.
And I know we're running out of time, but can you explain why? Or your data showing it why the disconnect?
I think they're just different. I mean, I think they're different kinds of people. I mean, I think Democrats are, I think the kinds of people who consider themselves Democrats and usually vote for Democratic candidates have a very different value system than the ones that identify as Republicans and usually and vote more often than not on the Republican side. I think they're just different people and different constituencies and different sets of priorities. And which is why to me there's such a narrow slice of voters that are truly independent and are really free agents in the process. And that a lot of the variances from one election to the other, it's people just deciding not to vote because they're disillusioned with their side or somebody on their side. And I think that's a lot of the variation of it, and then the little group in the middle. But so I just think the bases of the two parties have totally different sets of personal agendas and priorities.
Are pollsters asking where people are getting their news and information, and is that factored into any kind of tabulation of a poll?
Well, I mean, in if you're I think candidate polls that are done for candidates, maybe a little, not that much. There's a great deal of data out there, broadly, nationally. Pew Research Center and the Gallup does one for oh shoot, I think it's the Knight Foundation of where people get their news, and occasionally I see some others, but I don't know that candidate polls are spending that much time delving into that.
Wouldn't that be interesting data, Charlie? I mean, wouldn't that say a lot?
Yeah, but the thing is, fielding a good poll, I mean, a good one, you're talking about a lot of money, and you only a questionnaire that goes much more than 12 or 15 minutes and you're tempting the gods. I mean, you're asking people to terminate. I mean, you really are.
Yeah.
And that's why I get a kick out of looking at the YouGov, and I mean, well, God knows how long those questionnaires go. Uh, that you can't possibly get a representative sample at the front end that's going to be there at the back end.
Okay,
They have no self-control over what questions. So there's a limit to how much you could do in a poll and keep it within the limits of what you can expect respondents to hang in there for.
Okay, we're going to go to Bob Noun, then Billy Stapleton, and follow up with follow-ups from Laura Bellin and Richard Bender. So Bob Noun, you're up next.
Charlie, how does Plattner dropping out and Troy Jackson now being the presumptive nominee change that race in Maine?
It's funny that because the field was mostly gubernatorial candidates, I was glad that I'd gone to one of the gubernatorial debates. I felt like looking at the field of candidates, the post-Plattner field of candidates, I felt like I was watching a bunch of middleweight fights to see who was going to go up against a heavyweight in a general election. And that I think any number of them would do fine in terms of consolidating the Democratic vote. But I think that Nirav Shah was probably maybe the only one that had like a pretty fair shot of breaking into those the middle 3, 4, 5%. I mean, to me, that you look at the swing voters to me are people that don't love Donald Trump. They don't loathe Donald Trump. They may or may not have voted for him once, maybe twice, but have grown tired of him. But at least in the case of Maine, they know the chair of the Appropriations Committee for a poor state is a pretty big deal. A small state is a pretty big deal. I should say small, not poor. And that they're weighing the cost. And that's why I think the Plattner was a big package in the sense that I think he's probably the most charismatic Senate candidate that I've seen in 20 years. I think his campaign apparatus was brilliant. I'd never seen a Senate campaign take off as fast as it did. At the same time, I think said and wrote many times that Democrats were out of their minds to nominate him, just as Republicans in Texas were out of their minds to nominate Ken Paxton. That John Cornyn would have been a lock in a general election. And quite frankly, I think the Governor Mills would very likely have beaten Collins. But Plattner had a little hole was not doing as well among Democrats as Collins was doing among Republicans, and was underperforming a little bit with women. And but I don't think Democrats are coming out. They're not going to have a candidate of the quality that Plattner was, but they're obviously not going to have one with the personal liabilities that Plattner had. And I met with him actually the last full week of the campaign, and I had kind of gotten this impression watching him in a debate, but is that first of all, I think probably the most distracting, unhelpful thing that someone can know about him is oyster farmer, because it's like a tertiary part of who he was and a third, like a distant source of his income. I think he was actually a fairly smart guy, fairly well read, very, very converse on issues. I think he was more liberal than he probably should have been, but the guy wasn't a meathead. He really wasn't. But at the same time, and people say, well, he appeals to the working class. Well, shit, the data shows he wasn't actually. He was actually reaching suburban, college-educated women who were not offended by the harassment stuff. That was his target were the people that he did well on. So the race was fundamentally even before. It'll be real. It's going to be close, but I think Democratic chances are probably a little bit lower now than they were with the pre-last scandal Plattner.
Okay, I'm sorry. It's 1:00. Billy, I really apologize, but I want to ask if Charlie have a second for a follow-up from Laura.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Laura, go ahead with your follow-up, and then Richard.
Speaker Mike Johnson was just here in Iowa campaigning for Marionette Miller Meeks, and he basically said that he endorsed Trump's lies about fraud. He said they got a classified briefing and there was blockbuster information. How worried are you that if Democrats win control of the House, that Mike Johnson will just say there was fraud and not seat 10 or 12 Democrats or whatever?
I don't think there's much of a chance of that. I mean, I really don't. And I'm trying to figure out what I want to say here because as Speaker Johnson's from my hometown, graduated from the same high school I did, and his parents were in my high school graduating class. Having said that, I've never met the guy. I don't have a burning need to meet him. But I, kind of hate to trash the hometown guy. But look, he says whatever he feels like he has to say to survive with his constituency of one. And it is what it is. And, I think that one of the most tragic things that have happened in recent years is Congress basically punting its intended status to be a co-equal branch of government. And, it's really, really unfortunate. But, I think we're paying a price for civics not being effectively taught for the last 40 or 50 years, and appreciation for separation of powers, for federalism, for that is, I think you have voters, elected officials, and increasingly judges that don't fundamentally understand what the founders did and why they did it and why it's important to keep it. And I think it's tragic.
Charlie, does Citizens United and the ungodly amount of money being spent on campaigns make your list?
No.
What?
The thing is, it doesn't, because if you're a Democrat, you can name off dozens and dozens of billionaires that are giving. But the thing is, it's not, conservatives, Republicans have their own list. The very, very, very few competitive general elections are getting determined on money. I mean, every cycle I see incredibly well-funded candidates go down in flames, and I see candidates that were not as well-funded, but they had enough money to do what they need to do. And that's actually the key, is does a candidate in a competitive race have enough money to get their message out? Whether they have as much as the other candidate, I think it's a hell of a lot less important as do they have enough to do what they need to do. But the system is awash in money, and it's far more than anybody needs. And I think equating money with free speech? Oh, I think that's absurd. And I totally disagree with Citizens United, but I think there's a lot that's getting blamed on money that it's not really money, related. But
Okay. Okay, Bender, you have the last word with Charlie Rose.
Okay,
Charlie Cook.
Just 2 points. One, Hawken always dramatically overpolled independents, and we only really looked in the crosstabs at what we called target, which was about 8 or so percent of the electorate. And we did regularly look at where that 8% got their news from, which if we aggregated 4 polls, which we had at the end of the cycle, we had a pretty good group to look at. And two, looking at the swing voters, the swing districts, maybe 15, 20, depending upon who you believe. To Peter Hart's question, in almost every case, we have a Democrat who is not democratic socialist, and we have a Republican who is endorsed by Donald Trump. So I think maybe that question, might have some impact. And I want to get your further view.
I don't equate democratic socialists on one side with endorsed by Donald Trump on the other. No, because most Republican nominees are endorsed by Donald Trump. Most Democrats aren't democratic socialists. I just don't put them, they're not, I don't think it's a fair, comparison. If you want to say full-blown MAGA and democratic socialists, maybe that's even a little bit of a push, but I think the test, one test is going to be the Michigan primary next month. If Haley Stevens wins the Democratic nomination, this kind of year should probably have a little bit of an advantage over Mike Rogers, the Republican. If El Said wins the Democratic nomination, I think Democrats can kiss that seat off.
On that note, Charlie, it's very clear that we would love to have you back in October if you're willing.
Just ask.
Okay, I will. How do people find your Substack column? And I understand.
If you just go Charlie Cook Politics Substack, and it's available for free, it generally pops up on Thursdays and Fridays. It's a column that I do for that's behind a paywall earlier in the week for National Journal and the Cook Political Report, but goes into the public domain on Thursday, Fridays.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. This was
Take care, everybody.
We're just getting started. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.